Hello and welcome to another Friday conversation. I'm here today with Sophie Doherty, who is a solicitor at a litigation firm on the South Coast. So I'm going to ask her to come and say hello and let us know a bit more about who she is and what she does. So thank you for joining me, Sophie.
Hi, thanks, Hannah.
It's great to speak to you today. We were just sharing notes there that you work in defendant insurance, and I qualified into defendant insurance many years ago and did a couple of years. So I have some idea of the work you do. But tell us a bit more about what you do.
So I work for a small litigation firm on the South Coast, which is obviously glorious now at this time of year when the weather is so nice, except we can't really be out in it, can we? And I primarily deal with defendant litigation arising from road traffic accidents. So I tend to represent the insurance companies who are dealing with the claims arising from those involving their policyholders. And it's a bit of a range of work. Every day is different, no day is dull. And so yeah, it's a really interesting area of law, and it's something that is really quite busy at the minute, surprisingly.
Yes, I was going to say, you said you're keeping busy.
Yes, we're quite lucky, I think, actually, and I think with everything the way that it is at the minute, people are working together to resolve these cases in perhaps a less litigious way than they might otherwise have done prior to now. Everybody's working together, which is quite nice, and we're certainly very busy, and our insurer clients are very busy, so it's keeping us going for the time being.
Oh, that's great. I love to hear that that people are working together a bit more to get things done. I mean, I've noticed that obviously in my area in property, but in litigation as well. That's really interesting.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's because people have had to adapt to this new way of working. We're faced with the court system at the minute, which is heavily overburdened, and people are having to appreciate that being very litigious and being very difficult in these times isn't the way forward. And we, quite frankly, we all need a favor here and there. And so people are being a little bit more understanding, a little bit more accommodating in terms of, particularly in respect of court deadlines and things like that. And reaching agreements on things which they might otherwise not have if we weren't doing what we're doing now.
That's so interesting, and a whole other topic that we could talk about another time, but how this will change, how this will change going forward, because if you've learned to become more collaborative and to work together to get things done, when we go back into the office, do we unlearn that? Do we go back to the way it was before, or do we think actually there's some bonuses in working this way?
I certainly think that particularly in what I do, there are certain circumstances where that's just not possible, because each side has to represent their client's interests, and they clearly conflict, and you are obliged to do the best job possible, and so in certain circumstances, particularly where you've got claims which are perhaps suspected to be fraudulent and things like that, sometimes the collaborative approach isn't the way forward, because that's simply not going to happen. However, I think in the majority of cases, certainly that I personally have been dealing with, the collaboration is definitely there. People understand that everybody's got their own circumstances. We're all very busy. We all have things to do. And we're trying to manage it as best we can in this new environment. And they're realizing that there are benefits to being nice to each other. Litigation isn't always that way. Sometimes, we're not technically supposed to like each other, but now we have to, and it's bringing out a different side in people, which is quite nice.
Oh, absolutely. That's very interesting. It will be interesting to follow that in the months to come to see how things go. So, talking about the different ways of working now, how much did you work from home before now? Did you do it regularly? Did you do it just if you had a washing machine being delivered, for example? How different is it now?
So strictly speaking, we were very lucky prior to, so everybody at my firm was guaranteed a day from home if they wanted in. So people tended to avail of that. And personally, for me, it depended on how busy I was, because I found that the office environment was a much easier environment to be in. And I was able to separate out home and work. And I quite liked that. So the majority of the time I would actually be in the office, and I wouldn't necessarily take the day from home. But if I needed it, like you said, in those circumstances where I had life admin to deal with, and perhaps my working week wasn't as hectic, then certainly taking that day from home, I hadn't. And it was easy to manage, because usually I would reserve fairly straightforward tasks and things like that, not necessarily court deadlines, but everything else that comes with litigation, I would reserve it for that day, so that I knew I had a fairly easy day and I didn't need a scanner and a second monitor and all these other things, and I didn't need to send a load of stuff out in the post that day. So I was used to it, but certainly not on this level. This is entirely different.
And what you're noticing is the big differences for you?
Big difference is having, knowing that everything now has to be done obviously from home. And so I had to change my setup. I had to obviously have all my equipment. I had to have, additional admin bits and pieces and stationery and, things that I wouldn't have necessarily needed beforehand, because, I wasn't focusing on court deadlines on my days from home. And now, I'm having to make sure things are able to be scanned and printed and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So really it's the setup and sort of the actual work environment, and making that more like the office as opposed to still being at home.
Yeah.
I found that's the biggest change for me.
Right.
And trying to recreate that office environment in my dining room.
Yeah, it's happening in homes across the country, I'm sure.
Yeah, and as I say that, my dining room is sort of adjoined on. There's an archway through to our sitting room, and as I say that, my almost 5-year-old has sort of quickly run between the two, gathering up her things, and I think, right, okay. It's strange.
Oh, absolutely. So you've mentioned your daughter there. Who do you have at home with you?
So at home with me, I have my little one, who I said she's almost 5, and I have my other half as well. He's actually out on errands this morning, so I am now mum and solicitor in one. For this brief couple of hours, and I'm hoping it won't be for too much longer.
Oh, so is he working from home as well? Are you trying to do the juggle?
Well, it's not so much a juggle. He's actually self-employed, and his company is closed. He contracts out to a company. He's in construction, and his company is closed, so he's actually not working at all. And so in respect of the juggle, I would say it's a little bit less than, for example, if I had somebody who was obviously, maintaining employment, and having to work from home as well. But I think he is finding the difficulty in, having this ball of energy to manage all day, every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I speak to people about this often. There is no perfect answer. There's no, this is a good situation to be in, or this is a better one. I think whether people are working and trying to do the juggle, that's stressful. If people are not working and then trying to do the childcare that they're not used to doing, and perhaps even missing their job. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of us, we like our job. It gives us
absolutely
something, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's where I'm lucky, because I can at least try to separate out my work week from my weekend. So Monday to Friday, I've got my work hat on, I know what I'm doing, and then come the weekend, yes, okay, I'm not actually leaving the environment, but I know it's my weekend and I've got my time off. And at that point, then it sort of becomes, you know, his week is Monday to Friday, you know, managing child as far as possible, and then sort of at the weekend, I suppose it's a little bit of a relief in a way, because there's another pair of hands to help with that. But it certainly, even during the work week, you know, trying to manage it even just with one child, and even with the two of us here, it's still a challenge, which I wasn't expecting. And I think that's where I was quite naive, maybe.
Well, I think we all were. I mean, none of us are teachers, are we? And
No,
you know,
not at all.
we weren't prepared for it at all. No, I think we're all just doing the best we can, and that's all we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it makes you really appreciate the people, the teachers and the before school carers and the after school carers who are essentially doing this day in, day out. You have such a much greater appreciation of them than you did do before, I think, because you realise exactly what they're dealing with, and they don't just have one, they have 30 of them.
No, absolutely. And one good thing I've noticed is that particularly my eldest, my 10-year-old, he keeps saying how boring homeschooling is and how much he can't wait to get back to school. So I think the one good thing to come out of this is I might get a few months of not moaning about school.
Yeah, and my little one is the same. You know, she's already asked on several occasions, you know, when can I go back to school? And which is lovely, because, you know, you never want them to hate school. You want them to love it and enjoy it and make the most of it, because when we get to this age, we say, oh, I'd love to be in school again. I don't want to be an adult anymore, I want to go back to school.
Yes,
it's with hindsight, isn't it? You just you never really appreciate it at the time.
Yeah, no, very true, very true. What would you say have been your highs and lows over the last week or so? What have been the high points and the not so great times?
I think this week, for me personally, has been, although still very busy, a slightly quieter week, and it's allowed me to get things in order, because I think when you've got the upheaval and everything else, you are in that danger of starting to feel a little bit out of control. And that really sort of pulls on your energy. It pulls on all the sort of physical and mental resources you have, and you think, you know, I've got all this stuff to do, and you can start to feel a little bit bogged down. Whereas, you know, I've had a little bit of additional support from my other half. He's not a lawyer, and you know, so I think this has been an eye-opener for him, to see what it is that I do day to day, and realise that I don't just sit behind a desk every day. You know, it's not a simple, you know, typing at my computer every day. It's, you know, an actual job that I have to do, and there's deadlines, and there's things that I have to achieve every day. So I think that's stepped up the support that I've had this week. So that's been, for me, that's personally a high, to be able to say, right, okay, I've got somebody to understand what I'm doing. I've got that additional support, and I can get everything in order. So I'm feeling quite good this week. I'm feeling ahead and feeling quite positive about, you know, the coming weeks. Whereas, you know, for a while there, you're trying to adjust, you're trying to adapt, and you're trying to keep everything ticking over until you figure it out. So I'd say that's been high. I can't say I've had a real low this week, which is quite nice. I don't think there's been anything too negative. I think this week has been quite a positive one, in terms of work and life balance. So it's definitely I would say a turning point.
Oh, right. That's interesting, isn't it? That's really good. Yeah. And is there anything you feel you've learned about yourself or about your work or about being at home that might be useful to other people?
I think me personally, I feel that it's been a learning curve for me in terms of self-discipline. And I think being in the home environment, I think it could be really easy to fall into bad habits. I think it could be really easy to find it difficult to separate out home and work. And that was one of my biggest fears, because I never want to take work home. I never want to be the person who dwells on everything once I come home, because as far as I'm concerned, that's my time to focus on my family and my child and spend time with her, because, you know, we're very lucky in another sense to be in the position that we're in, to be able to be at home and spend all this time here. But for me, the challenge has been having that self-discipline, recreating the office environment between, even if it's just between 9 and 5:30, whatever it is, and having that self-discipline to focus on that and treat it as I would a normal, you know, work day and work week.
Yes.
And that it's no different.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. I think that's a top tip, because I've been saying to people, actually, because I've worked from home for about 8 years, not every day. Some days I would go into the office, but mainly from home. And for the first 3 years, I would say I wasn't very good at getting that switch off right, and it did increase the stress levels hugely. So I'd have sort of, you know, my work's set up on the dining room table and leave it there all evening, and I'd be walking past and I'd have a look at something else, or I'd check something else, and there was never a proper separation between work time and home time. And I personally know what that does to stress levels, so I completely agree with you. Even if you're in the same place where you're doing your work in the day, you can sort of shut it down and move it away, can't you, and have that mental separation.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because and I think there is another side to it, and I think the benefit of working from home is that you can sort of manage your own hours, and of course you don't want to be working well into the, you know, dark hours, but it's knowing that you've got it under control. And I think for your mental health, that is the most important thing, knowing that you can switch off, knowing that you've got everything sorted and done, whether you do that at 6 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the evening. I guess that's totally up to you, but just having that sort of feeling of accomplishment and feeling of organization, and knowing that everything is as it should be, I think that makes such a difference. Everybody's different. Everybody has to find their way, don't they? And what works for me might not work for you, and that is the biggest thing that people have to learn, because sometimes I don't think, personally for me as well, I don't think I was very self-aware. I wasn't really aware of, you know, my capabilities, and then I was thrown into this situation where I had to figure that out, and I had to figure out what is the best way for me to manage it in this environment. So I would, you know, people are probably still trying to figure that out, and I still am, certainly in different respects, but it's so important, like you said, knowing that you can switch off. That's a big thing.
Absolutely. No, I think you're right, and I think that's probably very true for a lot of people. They're used to whatever their previous work hours were, but actually if they play around with it and test it, they might find that if they work slightly different hours, they've got more energy, they're more productive. You know I like getting up early and doing an hour or two, you know, at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning before the children are up and eating things, because I feel I've got a real head start to the day if I do an hour and a half to 2 hours first thing. But you know, that's what works for me, whereas other people, maybe later in the day people, and like to work till 8 o'clock at night. You know, people have to test and find what works for them, I think.
Absolutely. And I remember a long time ago, and as lawyers, and working, I guess, under more traditional models, you know, we are timed by our billable hours, although at my particular firm, that's not necessarily the case. But, you know, everything's time recording, everything's, you know, focused on chargeable hours and non-chargeable hours, and you know, things like that. And so to come away from that can be very difficult, to find a different way, whilst still getting everything done. That's definitely a challenge. And I remember somebody said to me a long time ago, and this was an old boss, he said to me, I don't really care when you do it. He said, as long as you've got it done, that I'm happy. As long as you know that you've got everything you need to do done, he said, that's fine. You know, and that sort of, I try and think of it like that way, and I try and think, well, as long as I hit my goals and my targets for the day, I feel like I've achieved and accomplished, and I don't feel stressed out. So I have my little to-do list and tick through that and do all those things. Not always, it's not always easy to do, because some days are thrown off. You'll get an email which takes up your entire day, having to sort out an issue or a problem, or you know, it's not that simple. But certainly having that in mind, and having that flexibility, giving yourself that little bit of flexibility to say, well, okay, this doesn't work for me because my child's having a screaming match in the sitting room. I need to deal with this, but you know, I can finish this off later on in the day and still get what I need to do done, and just finding what works.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I hope for anybody who listens to this who hasn't perhaps thought about that yet, I mean, they might have done, given how many weeks we're into this now, but for some people, they may not. You know, they may still be trying to work their sort of usual hours, and hopefully this will encourage them to think about whether that is what works best for them. Or as you say, how you can have your list, so you know you've got that sense of, I've got through what I need to do today, I can put it down, you know, happily, but also accepting, just like you've said there, you know, you might be thrown a curveball, whether it's work or family related.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think that'll be really helpful advice for people. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Lovely to chat to you, Sophie.
And you, Hannah, thanks very much.
Yeah, it's been great, and I look forward to keeping in touch, and we'll see how things go when we get back into the sort of world of normality.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, lovely. Thanks a lot, Sophie.
Thank you.